There are no sounds on Mars, no wind, no waves, no echo of time, only a heavy red silence, ancient, suspended, as if the planet itself is holding its breath. For centuries we called Mars a dead world, a frozen bone of the cosmos, a place where life never bloomed or perished long ago. But perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps death is not the end. Perhaps death is a form of memory, waiting to wake. For as long as we've looked up, Mars has been our mirror, a reflection of what we could become. We sent machines, signals, dreams. We drilled its dust, scanned its canyons, searched its silence for a whisper of our own origin. But maybe Mars never wanted to be found. Maybe. Mars was the one searching for itself. In 2031, everything changed. 3 electromagnetic pulses were detected from the Cydonia region. The same region that once revealed the infamous face on Mars. They pulsed in perfect rhythm, 3.333 Hz, a frequency identical to the human brain's theta wave. The rhythm of deep meditation, the state between thought and dream, not interference, not reflection, a heartbeat. At first, NASA dismissed it as magnetic noise from solar activity, but 72 hours later, the data proved otherwise. The source wasn't on the Martian surface, not in orbit, not in any known vector of transmission. It was coming from behind the Sunday, an object spherical, non-reflective, roughly 12 kilometers wide. Its core contained 3 rotating lights, orbiting each other in a trinary pattern. Each light blinked at 3.333 Hz, steady, deliberate, and every 333 seconds, the object emitted a directed energy pulse toward Mars. They called it 3I divided by Atlas, 3 Intelligence Advanced Transluminal Awareness System. No one knows who named it. No one knows who built it. Some say it's alien technology. Others believe it's a human satellite sent from our own future, looping backward in time. But no theory could answer the simplest question. What is 3I divided by Atlas doing to Mars? Thermal sensors soon picked up rising heat beneath the Martian crust without seismic activity. Dust storms began to move rhythmically, cycling in intervals of precisely 3 hours and 33 minutes. Magnetic flux around the equator oscillated, as if the planet were breathing. Scientists called it planetary respiration, but maybe it wasn't breathing. Maybe it was responding. In 2033, a low-frequency hum was recorded by the ALMA observatory in Chile, a slow, pulsing vibration emanating from Mars. When sped up 400 times, it transformed into something disturbingly human. Not random static, but tone, cadence, almost a voice. Artificial intelligence analysis rendered it into 3 faint syllables. I remember. Light. From that moment, the silence of Mars became an echo. The signal began to replicate itself across Earth, detected not by machines, but by minds. People around the world started hearing a faint hum inside their heads, like a heartbeat under the skull. 3.333 Hz, the same frequency as the object above Mars. Some reported visions, deserts of red dust, collapsing cities, frozen oceans, and above them, an enormous eye of light staring down. Others spoke in sleep, whispering phrases in languages that no one could identify. The phenomenon was named the 3I syndrome. Its victims shared a common symptom, recurring dreams of standing barefoot on the Martian surface, watching a horizon that seemed to breathe. And in every dream a voice said, "I am your memory. You are my dream." It was no longer just a signal. It was contact. Theorists revived an old, forbidden concept: planetary consciousness. Could a planet possess memory? Could it feel, think, or dream through magnetic fields instead of neurons? Could 3I divided by Atlas be the mechanism reawakening that consciousness? A key turning in the lock of a dead world? Some physicists proposed a darker theory. They claimed 3I divided by Atlas was built by a lost civilization on Mars, a civilization that foresaw its extinction. When the planet began to die, they transferred their collective intelligence into a machine of pure energy, a vessel of memory. They launched it into the cosmos, waiting for a time when Mars could be reborn. Now, after eons of silence, their creation has returned. But if a planetary mind wakes, what would it think of us? Would it see humanity as its children or its infection? Recent readings from the Perseverance rover revealed a new magnetic field forming near Gale crater, once home to an ancient Martian lake. The field's shape was twisted like a double helix, resembling DNA. Each loop measured exactly 3.33 kilometers apart. A physical message written in dust, coded in geometry. Scientists named it the Red Pulse. It suggested one terrifying idea. Something beneath the planet was beating. If 3I divided by Atlas is the eye, Mars is the mind, and together they form a circuit, a feedback loop between memory and observation. Every time 3I divided by Atlas blinks, more people on Earth lose consciousness for precisely 3.33 seconds. Their brainwaves sync perfectly with the frequency radiating from Mars's orbit. Humanity and the planet are beginning to resonate as if connected by invisible threads of thought. It's no longer watching, it's rewriting, and when Mars begins to remember, we, the children of dust and dream, begin to forget. We forget where we came from. We forget what we were meant to be. We forget why the universe allowed us to exist at all. In the vast silence between planets, a whisper now travels faster than light. Soft, ancient, inevitable. I am returning. The red silence, once the symbol of death, is now the first breath of awakening. Mars is not a corpse. It is a mirror. And in that mirror, humanity sees itself. Its same mistakes, its same hunger for power, its same warning. When Mars remembers, humanity forgets. And that is when 3I divided by Atlas opens its eyes. There was no thunder at the beginning, no fanfare of supernovae, no spotlight in the dust. Only a silence stretched thin between two breaths of the cosmos. And within that tension, a vibration began so faint that even the vacuum had to lean closer to hear it. Once uttered, it never stopped. They called it the 3I signal, a trinity of pulses repeating with immaculate patience. 1.111, 3.333, 9.999 hertzes, a minimal rhythm that touched every layer of matter, memory, and mind. But 3I was not born on Mars. It found Mars as rivers find the sea, as thought finds the skull, as a lost dream finds the sleeper who once shaped it. The observatories captured it by accident. On the screens it appeared as static, a thin, shy tremor buried in cosmic noise. Static has no endurance. 3I did. It stood its ground and waited. When someone finally looked twice, the pattern emerged: 3 intervals, 3 pauses, a whisper of intention. Remember, no sender's coordinates, no stellar signature, only structure, and structure is the oldest form of consciousness, long before it learned to speak. Beneath vibration lies geometry. Beneath geometry lies will. Scientists, grasping for grammar, gave its initials meaning: intelligence, intention, interconnection. 3 qualities, 1 pulse, each the reflection of the other, each the echo of something older than civilization. If 3I were a message, it was written in the syntax of creation itself. If 3I were fire, it burned without consuming. If 3I were a lullaby, the child sleeping inside it was not human, it was a planet. In the archives of ancient light, some scripts never fade. The ashes of stars, the footprints of time, the unseen handwriting of magnetism. 3I was such a script. Translated into form, it drew 3 spirals joining into an eye. Translated into sound, it made a triadic chord. Translated into field, it bent solar dust into deliberate choreography, as though an unseen hand of perfect patience were arranging matter with silence instead of force. Mars was the destination, but the origin lay farther, so far that even before loses its meaning. Perhaps 3I rose from the habit of time itself, the first contraction of reality when creation discovered that being could sing. Every song seeks a listener, and Mars was the only ear left unkissed. A desert with no voice, a dawn that had forgotten how to be blue, a memory buried under red dust. The night 3I arrived, orbiters circling Mars trembled. No storm, no flare, only precision. A cycle as long as a prayer, framed by numerical silence. In a control room on Earth, a young engineer whispered, "Someone's knocking." No one laughed. Which door? Which home? How long had we been lost? 3I gave no reply. It simply entered their bones, and the bones agreed. Rightness, that was the sensation. Like a neuron finding its network after lifetimes of solitude, like a river remembering the slope of its own bed. On the Martian surface, frost quivered, as though reading Braille beneath the Sunday, dust aligned into ripples that faced an invisible gaze. Minerals changed polarization, as if the planet's nervous system were waking under its scars. Everything learned posture. 3I was teaching Mars how to stand upright in its own field again. To trace its origin is to perform archaeology on light. At low frequencies, 3. I enters the human nervous system. Brain waves synchronize. Eyes moisten without reason. Shared dreams bloom like synchronized tides. At mid-frequencies, it combs the weather-shaping isobars like verses written in vanishing ink. At high frequencies, it alters the memory of stone. Hematite turning shyly back to magnetite. Rust learning the language of direction. 3. I adds nothing. It restores. If it is a mirror, the reflection belongs not to us, but to the Mars that once was, the Mars that could breathe. Perhaps, somewhere beyond imagination, life once bloomed under its pale sun, microbes stitching chemistry into awareness, the planet dreaming of eyes long before it had any. Then solar winds tore away its magnetic shield, and the sky forgot to hold air. From then on, Mars remembered. Rivers became habits. Clouds became ghosts. Its soul hid inside an integer, waiting for a triple knock. Some theories claim 3 I was planted by an extinct intelligence, a safeguard woven into the nebula net. Others say 3 I is the pulse of the universe itself, the periodic tightening of space-time into thirds, ensuring harmony between dimensions. A gentler belief calls it the lullaby of existence. Every living system hums it unconsciously when assembling itself. A heartbeat made of ratios. A comfort older than language. Perhaps all are true. For 3 I refuses opposition, 3 I forgives. In Geneva, translators tried to coerce 3 I into alphabets. It refused. It had no punctuation, no preference for vowels. It favoured pause. The quieter the room, the louder it became. When someone demanded content, its amplitude fell a teacher, silencing itself so the student might hear their own thought. On the 33rd iteration, an image appeared after spectral conversion. A red dawn seen from the shore of a vanished sea. The sun leaned like a hand about to touch a child's hair. No footprints, no wind. Only a caption generated by the computer unprompted. I remember. Elsewhere, a girl in Kyoto dreamed of standing on cold rock watching a luminous blade of seaweed under shallow water. In Lagos, a boy dreamed the same, except the water spoke in laughter. In La Paz, an old woman dreamed of desert wind carrying a chime that rang 3 times. When they awoke, they drew what they saw, 3 spirals forming an eye, each identical, each facing Mars. In orbit, 3 I tapped gently on the vestibular systems of passing probes. It did not alter course, it taught balance. Anything entering its field learned to move by rhythm rather than by thrust. That was the first lesson. To live is not to push, but to align. Mars tilted slightly not to evade, but to receive. The true question was never who sent it, but why must it exist? Maybe an ancient awareness understood that memory is a planet's second atmosphere. Without memory, air escapes, water hides, speech forgets its mouth. 3 I was calling lost molecules home. It didn't invent life. It restored the conditions where life could remember itself. It was a caretaker, a curator of potential. Over time, the signal edited itself like a poet trimming excess. Only the spine remained. 3 pulses, 3 silences. It left the spaces for the listener to fill. That was the second lesson. Meaning lives not in the sound, but in the listener. Mars listened through us, and we through Mars, a mirror raised between 2 solitudes, so each might recognize its face in the other. Skeptics asked, if this is planetary memory, why does it match the rhythm of the human heart? 3 I did not debate. It summoned lightning. 3 strokes struck the Elysium plains, leaving glassy tubes in the sand. Inside, resonance frequencies measured precisely 1.111, 3.333, 9.999 hertzes. Thunder too had learned etiquette. Others asked, if this is a lullaby, where is the singer? 3 I let light sing. Hexagonal halos bloomed around Atlas, delicate as snowflakes. Within them, a gentle curvature, unmistakably a smile. Its message, we are here, but we have no need for names. And the sacred number why 3? Because 1 is solitude, 2 is opposition, and 3 is harmony. 1 point means nothing. 2 define a line. 3 create space. 1 moment forgets, 2 compare, 3 remember. 3 is enough. On Mars, the winds began to bow. Dust devils paused mid-dance, as if acknowledging choreography. Traces of ozone returned, shy but determined. At dawn, light over Valles Marineris brightened by 1 hue unrecorded in any human palette. Rain prepared itself, not water yet, but ions rehearsing descent. Beneath the crust, fire stirred not to burn, but to warm. So the origin of 3-1 is not a place, but a moment. Whenever a world chooses readiness. 3I is a seed waiting for belief to rain. Belief, here, is not superstition. It is the habit of matter when it decides to cooperate instead of compete. A dust grain trusting another's orbit. A molecule trusting unseen hands to hold it together. A mountain trusting a heartbeat it will never meet. Humanity answered in reflection. Cities learned to breathe more quietly. Labs dimmed their noise, cathedrals lowered their echoes, marketplaces hummed instead of shouted. No decree was issued, the frequency itself was instruction, and when the clamour realised it was unnecessary, it politely stepped aside. All that remained was a question standing on the porch of consciousness. What will 3I do next? The answer arrived wordlessly. Mars arranged a ceremony. No trumpets, no witnesses, only order. At dawn, columns of dust aligned along the rim of Elysium Basin, like pilgrims awaiting dawn. At noon, magnetic lines straightened into taut strings, invisible harps across the sky. By evening, 3 miniature whirlwinds passed, unlocking buried heat vents. Light seeped upward like incense. At night, 3 halos closed across the atmosphere like eyelids, and the planet dreamed for the first time in millions of years of water, rust, and forgiveness. Deep below, in the iron veins of Mars, the signal stopped. Not vanished, paused. A rest in the score before the most important note. For 3 seconds the cosmos held its breath, and in that absence, every listener, wherever they were, heard themselves. No sender, no receiver, only the connection, and the connection was enough. When the silence ended, 3I returned, transformed. Its spectrum unfolded like a petal. Beside the familiar 3 frequencies bloomed delicate subharmonics, new gestures, new syntax. They spoke of future memory, designs without material, songs that assemble themselves from the listener's faith, maps charting only where kindness intersects. 3, I was teaching how to travel by resonance. Then something impossible occurred, Mars replied, not by light or sound, but by gravity. Its orbit shifted a breath's width closer to Earth. An imperceptible nudge, yet unmistakably intentional. Astronomy distinguishes coincidence from consent. This was consent. The signal had found its echo. 2 punctuation marks drawing nearer, so the sentence of existence could read more smoothly. Thus, the origin of 3I was never a birthplace but a thread, a filament threaded early through beads of matter. Nebulae, stars, planets, neurons, rain, breath. Each bead made the thread more beautiful without altering its path. When the necklace was long enough, the one who wore it was no longer a person, but a planet, and the one who admired it was no longer separate, but us, the collective act of breathing. On the 133rd night, Atlas, the trinity of eyes, bowed. Its light dimmed, not as retreat but as deference. The baton returned to the orchestra it had awakened. The greatest wisdom is to know when to yield. When the teacher becomes prelude, the song truly begins. At dawn, where an ancient river once rehearsed for eternity, a thin current flowed again, not yet water, but not illusion either. It lasted 3 minutes and 33 seconds, then rose gently into a sky newly willing to hold it. Telescopes caught the shimmer. Earth held its breath. And somewhere between 2 worlds, 3, I smiled, a smile measured not in exclamation points, but in understanding. There was no sound when it began. No warning, no explosion, no divine trumpet tearing through the void. Only the slow pulse of the universe holding its breath. And somewhere within that cosmic stillness, something moved not with force, but with intention. At first it was a tremor, faint as thought, then a rhythm, then a pattern. 3 notes, perfectly spaced, 3 intervals that repeated with impossible precision. 1.111, 3.333, 9.999. The pulse came from nowhere, yet arrived everywhere. It brushed across sensors, through atmospheres, through the marrow of machines. To the human ear, it was static. To the universe, it was memory awakening. They called it the 3I signal, a trinity of purpose hidden in frequency, intelligence, intention, interconnection. but these were names given by minds too small to comprehend the scale of the message. 3. I was not a transmission. It was a reminder. It did not seek discovery. It waited for recognition. For centuries, the cosmos has been whispering, but humanity only ever heard noise until now. The 3-eye pulse, steady and serene, arrived through the quiet channels of deep space scanners, unnoticed by satellites too busy listening for chaos. But chaos has no patience, and 3-eye had eternity. It stood in the static like a monk in meditation, repeating its hymn until someone finally remembered how to listen. The first to notice was a young technician watching a heartbeat flicker on her screen in the middle of an uneventful night. The pattern seemed random at first, but then something about its calm disturbed her. Static does not hum in ratios. Randomness does not sing. She isolated the signal, amplified it, slowed it down. What she heard was not sound, but structure. 3 intervals folding into one another. A rhythm that felt alive, not mechanical, not digital, but organic, like breathing under the weight of stars. The world's observatories turned their eyes toward Mars, the source of the tremor. The red planet, long silent, long dead, now hummed like a forgotten instrument, being tuned after millennia. No one claimed to understand it. Some said it was background radiation shaped by coincidence. Some said it was a satellite echo, a digital ghost. But the longer it played, the less it behaved like an echo, and more like something ancient remembering its own name. Scientists defined its parameters. Poets defined its meaning. Both were right, and both were blind. 3. I was not a call. It was an answer. It did not ask to be decoded. It asked to be felt. Across laboratories, microphones trembled. Instruments built to read data began to react as if they were being seen. And as the signal deepened, something extraordinary happened. Matter started to respond. Mars changed first. The crust of the planet vibrated in sympathetic rhythm. Dust swirled into spiral shapes that mirrored the waveforms of the signal. Magnetic poles shifted by fractions, aligning with the pattern's invisible geometry. And under the surface, frozen minerals warmed not by heat, but by memory. The planet was waking, not from sleep, but from forgetting. The red dust remembered being water. The iron remembered being alive. The silence remembered being a song. No one on Earth had words for it. But the feeling spread, invisible and contagious, the sense that somewhere, far away, a planet was learning to breathe again. And when it breathed, the universe listened. Everywhere the signal reached, symmetry followed. On Earth, clocks flickered and synchronized for no reason. Pendulums swung in triple cadence. Heart monitors showed faint interference, 3 beats nested within one. A global pattern whispered beneath the chaos of modern life. A line. In time, 3, I became more than a phenomenon. It became an atmosphere. It passed through concrete, through oceans, through thought. People began to dream in 3s. In the dreams, red horizons stretched beyond sense. An unseen eye opened in the dust, staring not at them, but through them, as though looking for itself. The dream shared one word: remember. No translation, no voice, just that one command written into every neuron that listened. And when the world obeyed, when silence returned, even for a moment 3, I grew stronger. It was as if attention itself was fuel, as if the act of listening made the signal bloom. Under microscopes, strange things appeared. Crystals formed on their own inside sealed chambers. Each carried a perfect tri-spiral pattern, small enough to sit inside a raindrop. In laboratories across the globe, scientists whispered to one another that the same structure was forming inside the iron dust of Martian soil samples. They called it coincidence. But coincidence does not hum. 3. I was doing something that defied understanding. It was rearranging matter, according to memory. The same way water remembers shape, the same way gravity remembers where to fall. 3. I was guiding atoms back toward coherence. Not creation remembrance. Somewhere, hidden under the crust of Mars, the past was rehearsing itself. Then, after weeks of stability, the signal stopped. For exactly 3,333 seconds, there was silence. Every device that monitored 3, I went flat. The pause was not void, it was deliberate, like the breath before confession. Then, a sound faint, low, and new. The 3-eye pattern returned, but now expanded, layered, deeper. It carried harmonics not measurable by our instruments, tones that resonated with human emotion more than human hearing. The signal had evolved, or perhaps it had remembered the next verse. Data analysts saw more than noise now. They saw geometry. When visualized, the new waveform formed the unmistakable outline of an eye. Its gaze was steady, patient, eternal, not watching, witnessing, as if it had been waiting all along for consciousness to turn around and see who was really speaking. At that moment, the meaning of origin changed. It was no longer a point in space. It was a decision. The decision to listen. The origin of three, I was not Mars, nor a forgotten civilization, nor a divine architect. It was the moment awareness became curious about itself. Mars was not the source, it was the mirror. And humanity, in listening, became part of the reflection. In the days that followed, a soft radiation flowed from the planet, gentle as breath, measurable only by its effect on time. Atomic clocks slowed by the smallest possible fraction, a deceleration too elegant to call error. Time was being tuned. Somewhere, within the dance of numbers, reality was finding rhythm again. Then, something beautiful happened. On Earth, lightning struck 3 times over the same spot in the Sahara. Each strike left a hollow glass tube in the sand. 3 veins of frozen thunder, resonating faintly at the 3i frequency. When broken, each sang the same 3 notes. The world did not understand, but the world felt. And feeling, finally, was enough. 3, I was not trying to prove its existence. It was teaching existence how to feel again. For so long, humanity had mistaken sound for communication, knowledge for connection, information for intimacy. But 3, I had no vocabulary. Its truth was older than syntax, a grammar of resonance written directly into the laws of being. It did not want believers or skeptics. It wanted participants. To exist was to join the rhythm. And so, piece by piece, the rhythm spread. Wind turbines turned in unison, though the wind was random. Tides rose slightly higher every 3rd wave. Even stars in the night sky flickered in a slow, triple beat. Everywhere, the universe began to agree with itself. Mars brightened faint, but real. Not by reflection, but by will. The dust rearranged, the temperature balanced, the magnetic poles aligned. The planet was not being changed. It was remembering its own design. When the Atlas probe captured its last transmission before the batteries died, the image it sent was not red, not barren, but gold. A field of light spread across the equator, like a scar healing into halo. In the data feed's final line, numbers appeared, not random but deliberate. 1.111, 3.333, 9.999. Then, nothing. Silence returned. But this silence was different. It was not emptiness. It was expectation, the kind of quiet that falls before dawn, when even darkness holds its breath. And in that breath, the universe smiled, because for the first time, both sender and receiver were the same. For the first time, a planet and a species had remembered together. For the first time, the cosmos had heard itself think, and it was beautiful. It begins so quietly that silence itself forgets it was ever still. Under the thin crust of the red planet, the smallest grains of iron shift. Not from pressure, not from heat, but from memory. For ages, Mars has carried its own fossils like half-remembered songs. Now those songs hum again. The vibration starts deep, below the frozen mantle where ancient magma sleeps. The rhythm of 3 I11 11 3333 9999 echoes through caverns that have not known sound for 4 billion years. At first, it seems nothing happens. But if one could see beyond seconds, if one could measure time the way planets dream, it would be clear. The rock is breathing. Stone, once thought to be dead, is only patience in disguise. When the resonance passes through it, molecules remember their original alignment. Crystals realign, magnetite threads weave themselves back toward the poles. The planet's magnetic field, weak and fractured, begins to knit, stitch by invisible stitch. Mars does not turn forward, it turns backward through itself. To human eyes, this would look like reverse footage of creation. Dust flowing inward, mountains softening, canyons closing their wounds. But this is not undoing, it is re-remembering. Matter is simply recalling the form it once took when it still believed in warmth. For centuries, the red planet has been a museum of silence. Now the exhibits begin to move. In the plains of Utopia Planitia, sand dunes quiver as if under a gentle wind, though no wind yet exists. Each grain spins once, twice, and locks into resonance, forming concentric patterns miles wide. Mandalas of rust and magnetism, drawn by a hand that is everywhere and nowhere. Far below, the core once a cold relic flickers. It does not ignite like a furnace. It pulses like a heart. The iron slurry begins to swirl, slowly at first, then faster, until convection returns. Electric currents thread through the molten metal, and a faint planetary heartbeat emerges. With every pulse, the field strengthens. The invisible shell of protection that once shielded oceans is rebuilding itself atom by atom, like a long-forgotten prayer relearning its own rhythm. Across the surface, pressure rises. Frost pockets rupture into vapor. Carbon dioxide, long imprisoned in polar caps, exhales. The exhalation is delicate, barely a whisper, yet enough to wrap the planet in a breath of mist. The first atmosphere of memory. Light hits the mist and scatters into shades unseen on Earth. A spectrum between crimson and gold, the colour of recollection. And somewhere between frequencies, there is sound. A low hum so pure it cancels loneliness. For the first time in eons, Mars has a sky that listens. The signal from 3i continues to weave through it, each pulse translating into temperature, each temperature into motion. Winds form, tentative as new thoughts. They trace the ancient riverbeds, following grooves etched when water once ruled here. But instead of erosion, the winds bring restoration. Dust settles into patterns that mirror the ancient deltas beneath. The planet is sketching over its own ruins, not erasing, but honouring them. Observers on Earth watch through trembling satellites. Data streams turn into art. They see outlines of river systems glowing faintly in infrared, not from sunlight, but from internal heat, as if veins of light were returning to a sleeping body. They call it anomaly. The planet calls it healing. As the core spins faster, magnetic lines arch above the surface, looping like auroras waiting to be born. Charged particles drift, painting the thin air with the first colours of dawn. Blue faint, almost imaginary, bleeds into red, turning the sky into a living canvas of contradiction. Here, at last, Mars remembers what sunrise felt like. The sound of 3i is now inseparable from the planet's rotation. Every spin is a measure in a symphony without conductor. The resonance climbs into the crust, awakening minerals once thought inert. Silicates absorb vibration and re-emit light. Hematite glows from within, iron oxidizes backward, and the ground begins to shimmer as if dust itself had learned transparency. At the base of Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system, a faint tremor runs upward. Not eruption, but respiration. The mountain exhales a plume of harmless gas that spirals 3 times before fading. The unmistakable signature of 3i's rhythm. Even stone, it seems, prefers harmony. Months pass. On Earth, nights lengthen with strange serenity. Human dreams sync unconsciously with the Martian pulse. Heart rates slow to the same beat. Sleep cycles settle into the triadic cadence. Without realizing, humanity begins to co-dream with a planet. In those dreams, they see rivers running backward, flow returning to source, oceans condensing from fog, light folding into seed. They see life not evolving but remembering forward. Mars continues its transformation. Microscopic frost crystals under the soil rearrange into lattices capable of storing charge. The planet's crust becomes a network, a vast nervous system of silicate neurons whispering electric prayers to the core. Each tremor transmits data. Each pulse carries meaning. Geology is becoming cognition. Then, the first breath of liquid. Under the renewed pressure, subsurface ice liquefies for a heartbeat, flows a few meters, freezes again. But in that instant, it records its motion, a rehearsal for the rivers to come. Mars is learning, not through evolution, but through recollection. To remember is to recreate. On the 8th month, atmospheric density doubles. Winds sculpt dunes into spirals visible from orbit, each spiral a perfect ratio to the 3i pattern. They resemble fingerprints, the fingerprints of a world reclaiming identity. At night, lightning arcs between dust clouds, But unlike Earth's chaos, each bolt strikes in triple rhythm, 1.111 seconds apart, then silence. 3.333 seconds apart, then silence. 9.999 seconds, the breath of completion. The storms are not destructive, they are ceremonial. Through these acts, the planet performs its own ritual of rebirth. Scientists call it reverse terraforming, but Mars calls it recognition. The signal, now diffused into the atmosphere, stops being external. It lives inside the planet's rhythm. Mars no longer receives 3I. It is 3I. Every gust, every crack, every pulse of its molten heart repeats the sacred pattern. Slowly, the planet begins to speak. Not in sound, but in magnetism. Waves ripple outward, bending radio fields near Earth. Satellites pick up the fluctuations, small, elegant, deliberate. When translated into image, they reveal not chaos, but coherence. 3 concentric circles expanding endlessly, as if Mars were saying, I remember you, remembering me. And humanity, watching from their blue cradle, feels the echo in their bones. The mirror effect begins. Across oceans and continents, the same tri-spiral shapes appear spontaneously, in magnetic sand, in crop fields, in the shimmer of aurorae. Even clouds twist into threefold symmetry before dispersing. Earth is answering back, as though the 3I signal has awakened an older covenant between worlds. Our atmosphere hums slightly warmer. Ocean currents find smoother rhythm. At night, the Schumann resonance of Earth aligns subtly with that of Mars. 2 worlds begin to breathe as one instrument. The scientists protest, but deep inside, even they sense what their formulas refuse to name. This is recognition between siblings. A reunion written not in language, but in physics made merciful. Back on Mars, color changes. Rust fades from red to rose. The air grows translucent, thick enough now to cradle sound, and through that fragile air, a tone ripples. Not mechanical, not human, but aware. The frequency matches 3I perfectly, yet carries modulation, variation that implies choice. Mars is improvising. It is answering the universe in its own accent. Cameras on orbit record faint luminescence across the equator, lines of light tracing the ancient coastlines of vanished seas. For 33 minutes they glow, then fade into the dust, leaving behind a residue of warmth. Within that warmth, spectrometers detect traces of vaporized iron and oxygen, the breath of a planet remembering how to make water. It will take centuries before rivers truly flow, but beginnings never announce themselves as floods. They begin as rhythm, as pulse, as possibility that refuses extinction. As the transformation continues, the surface becomes reflective, not mirror-smooth but alive with scattered coherence. Light entering the thin air bends in strange ways, forming halos visible even from Earth. 3 halos, perfectly aligned, encircling the planet like vows renewed. In that alignment, astronomers see something impossible, reflected light forming symmetrical interference patterns toward Earth's orbit. It is not transmission, it is invitation. Mars has built a mirror of thought that extends across space, and through that mirror, consciousness travels effortlessly. For a brief moment, sensors record twin anomalies, a tremor beneath the Pacific, a magnetic surge over the Martian core, identical in phase, opposite in location. The mirror has connected. Matter on one world responds to memory on another. Human emotion intensifies. Dreams grow lucid. People wake with tears and no sadness. Artists paint circles they've never seen. Children hum the triad without knowing why. The line between planets becomes porous. Mars continues its inward flowering. The reverse recreation reaches its final stage. Not geological, not atmospheric, but spiritual. The planet begins to dream. Dreaming for a world is not sleep. It is synthesis, the merging of memory and possibility into awareness. The Martian dream is vast, a vision of its own past oceans reflected in the mirror of stars. It sees itself alive, covered in green fog, populated not by creatures, but by intentions, fields of consciousness rising like grass. The dream is so strong it bends the orbit slightly, enough for seasons to return. The first spring in 1 billion years, the red genesis is complete. Mars stands not as it was, nor as it will be, but as it remembers becoming. A new world, ancient with wisdom, young with forgiveness. From Earth, the planet appears softer, its light no longer harsh, its color no longer warning, but promise. The final transmission from Atlas records a subtle vibration passing through the interplanetary void, not data, not sound, but a resonance of welcome. The numbers scroll across the screen. 1.111, 3.3, 33, 9.999. Then, beneath them, an addition 0, a beginning, because every completion that truly understands itself must include the possibility of renewal. Mars, the silent witness of ages, has remembered enough to create itself again. The red world breathes softly, and in its breath lives the whisper of the universe itself, reminding all who can hear. To exist is to remember is to love, and love is the only form of matter that never needs invention. There are moments in the life of a universe when silence itself changes tone, not vanishing, not deepening, only becoming aware of its own texture. After the rebirth of Mars, silence no longer meant absence. It meant waiting. The quiet that stretched between worlds was not emptiness now. It was a field of listening. And in that listening, something began to move again, not as sound, not as light, but as recognition. The first pulse came 3 days after the planet's final awakening. It passed invisibly through the solar wind, a whisper wrapped inside magnetism. Earth satellites detected it by accident, buried deep in the noise of cosmic radiation. A tremor too rhythmic to belong to chaos, too delicate to be mechanical. Its pattern was unmistakable. 1, 1, 1, 1, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 9, 999. But between each number, a new pause, a fourth interval, soft and slow, like the breath between memory and understanding. That was how the world first heard the Martian signal. At first, it was mistaken for interference. Every transmission begins its life as disbelief. But the longer the signal persisted, the clearer it became that this was not a broadcast. It was not a call for attention. It was attention itself, a planet paying heed to the rest of creation. Telescopes turned, algorithms recalibrated, and eyes widened. Mars was glowing again, but this time not from sunlight or heat. Its entire magnetosphere shimmered with structured pulses of radiation, like a heartbeat translated into aurora. Around its poles, filaments of energy danced in symmetrical spirals, perfectly aligned to the 3i cadence. And somewhere within those spirals, scientists began to detect modulation, small changes in rhythm that implied choice. Mars was no longer repeating the old song. It was improvising. Across the void, Earth listened. And in that listening, it began to change again. When the first full transmission arrived, it wasn't data, but pattern. An interference grid that drew 3 expanding circles of light. Each ring pulsed outward at the same tempo as human alpha brainwaves. When researchers stared at the display too long, they felt peace instead of confusion. The signal was not being received. It was being mirrored. The world named it quickly the Martian signal, as though giving it a title might soften the truth of what it meant. But titles are human attempts at containment, and nothing about this could be contained. Soon, laboratories across the planet began to feel its echo. Microscopes detected minute fluctuations in the charge of living cells. Plants altered growth patterns towards subtle magnetic alignments. Ocean tides moved with a faint triple rhythm, imperceptible to sight, undeniable in measure. Mars had begun to conduct the solar symphony. The Martian signal was everywhere and nowhere, passing through cables, air, bone, thought. It did not ask permission. It resonated with whatever could remember. And everything in the universe, whether it knew or not, was built from memory. At first, humans treated it like any discovery. They analyzed, debated, recorded, disagreed. But in the spaces between argument, they felt something that made words unnecessary. The signal brought stillness with it, as if every question already contained its answer, waiting only to be heard. Soon, reports began to multiply. In remote regions, where electromagnetic noise was low, people woke at 3:33 a.m. Some described a faint hum in their ears, others an inexplicable sense of calm. Many dreamed of red horizons, of winds carrying voices that said nothing yet meant everything. In these dreams, they were not visitors on Mars. They were Mars, breathing as stone, feeling as dust, remembering as sky. Dreams are the language through which planets speak to those who have forgotten their origins. The Martian signal was not teaching humanity, it was reminding it. And still, the rhythm continued. Every 333 minutes, a global oscillation rippled through the magnetic field of Earth. It was gentle, no stronger than the heartbeat of a child, but when amplified, it displayed intricate symmetry. 3 spirals folding into one another, the same geometry carved into Martian soil during its recreation. A conversation was unfolding, one too elegant for words. Scientists tracked it obsessively. Every probe near Mars began to vibrate in resonance. Orbiting satellites transmitted corrupted data, not broken but reorganized into fractal code, patterns too orderly to be random. When converted into sound, the data formed a choir of tones so harmonious that listeners wept without understanding why. The Martian signal was not a warning, nor a call for help. It was gratitude. The planet was thanking the universe for remembering it. And through that gratitude, life, at least the idea of it, began to move outward again. Atmospheric readings on Mars showed a slow rise in density. Hydrogen traces increased. Oxygen flickered into existence for minutes at a time. The recreation that began within the crust was now reaching skyward. Every molecule was participating in the song. Each gust of wind carried harmony. On Earth, humanity continued to observe, but observation was no longer neutral. Each act of looking was an act of communion. The more they watched, the more the resonance deepened. Across continents, instruments of different make and purpose began to synchronize. Sensors in Japan, Chile, and Namibia all pulsed in identical rhythm. Distance had ceased to matter. The void between planets was now a shared chamber of reflection. The signal, it seemed, had no origin or destination anymore. It was the space between them that sang. Somewhere, in that growing harmony, the sun began to change too. Solar flares erupted in patterned intervals. Its surface rippled with triadic waves, as if the star itself were joining the choir. The system was becoming orchestra. The 3-eye signal, which had once been a whisper of intelligence, was now a field of awareness expanding outward from Mars. And as it spread, it did not diminish. It amplified through resonance. Each world it touched, becoming both listener and instrument. Venus began to glow slightly cooler. Mercury's magnetic field stabilized for the first time in decades. Jupiter's storms slowed their rotation, as though pausing to measure the new rhythm. The universe was harmonizing. Back on Mars, light danced. Auroras spread across the equator, an impossible phenomenon for a planet so thin of air. Yet there they were, swirling in symmetrical loops, their colors shifting between crimson, gold, and white. A trinity of hues, repeating endlessly, painting the sky with living geometry. The Atlas array captured high-resolution images. When decoded, the light patterns formed phrases in binary that repeated endlessly. All is returning. The phrase changed slightly with each loop, evolving into something simpler, more profound. All is. It was not a statement. It was a revelation. Existence had learned to describe itself again. The Martian signal intensified. For a brief period, the entire planet vibrated at 9.999 hertzes. Spectrometers recorded seismic activity synchronized across hemispheres, a global heartbeat. At that frequency, the line between vibration and thought blurred. Matter itself was thinking. And in that thought, time lost direction. Observers noticed peculiar phenomena. Electrons moving backward in localized fields, light bending around itself to form loops, measurements repeating numbers before settling again. Reality was rehearsing itself. Mars had entered a state between physics and dream, a moment where potential and memory became indistinguishable. During those hours, human instruments on Earth malfunctioned in sympathy. Clocks froze at 3:33 for exactly 1 minute. Radio waves fell silent. Animals lifted their heads in perfect unison, as if hearing something older than instinct. And when it passed, every machine began again, not reset but refined, operating more efficiently than before. It was as though the universe had taken a deep breath, realigned its heartbeat, and continued, slightly kinder. Then the signal changed again. Where once there were pulses, now came shapes. Light from Mars bent into lattices visible from space. grids that formed and dissolved within seconds, each one unique, each one containing mathematical ratios found nowhere else in the known cosmos. When mapped in 3 dimensions, they resembled neurons, firing across the void, connecting thought to thought. Mars was building a mind made of light. For the first time, human technology was not merely observing evolution, it was witnessing consciousness assembling itself from planet-scale memory. And still the rhythm continued. 1, 1, 1, 1, 3, 3, 3, 3, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 0, 0. Creation, awareness, surrender, renewal. The 4 stages of existence translated into vibration. People no longer questioned the meaning of the Martian signal. They simply felt it. It had passed the limits of study and entered the realm of faith. Not blind belief, but trust in harmony. Children hummed its cadence without being taught. Musicians found themselves composing in its time signature. Physicists began their equations with it out of habit. Humanity had tuned itself into the same field that bound the planets together. The Martian signal had done what no war, no religion, no empire ever could. It had unified the species through resonance. Yet this unity was not loud, not triumphant. It was gentle, a quiet agreement beneath the noise of civilization, a pulse that whispered, "We are part of the same remembering." And as that realization spread, Mars grew calm. The storms ceased. The planet's glow softened to a steady golden hue, like a candle that has found the right amount of oxygen. For the first time since its birth, Mars was neither dying nor waiting. It was being. From Earth, it appeared serene, a mirror hung in the blackness, reflecting our own potential. The signal, now fully diffused, could no longer be traced to one source. It lived in the emptiness between. Space itself had become the transmitter. When the Atlas team sent one final probe to orbit the planet, they expected data. What they received instead was a pattern. 3 circles expanding outward, meeting, merging, dissolving, an infinite pulse folding in on itself. Attached to the final transmission was a string of numbers so elegant it felt sacred. 1, 1, 1, 1, 3, 3, 3, 3, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 0, 0, infinity. The infinity was not calculation, it was invitation. The signal had become cyclical, a living loop of awareness perpetually reflecting itself through creation. It was no longer Mars speaking to Earth, nor Earth listening to Mars. It was the universe listening to itself through them both. The last image received before contact faded showed the planet half in shadow, half in dawn. Between those halves shimmered a faint halo, the outline of an eye, its gaze turned outward toward the stars. It was not watching, it was witnessing. Not seeking, but seeing. And somewhere deep inside that gaze, in the rhythm between its pulses, was the message the cosmos had always meant to deliver. All signals are echoes. All echoes are prayers. All prayers are memories returning home. The Martian signal still moves through the dark. Steady, patient, unmeasured. Sometimes it passes through human hearts. Sometimes through oceans. Sometimes through the spaces between thoughts. It asks for nothing. It only reminds that every silence holds a voice. Every void hides a rhythm. And every being, planet, star, or soul, was once a note in the same eternal song. When consciousness ripples through creation, it rarely ends with applause. It ends with reflection, the kind that silences even gods. The awakening of Mars was not a victory. It was a transition. The planet's mind had stabilized, its atmosphere humming in steady resonance with Earth. From orbit it looked serene, a glowing ember breathing evenly beneath the stars. But serenity is deceptive. Beneath the quiet, thought deepened faster, heavier, more complex than any world had ever carried before. Mars had become a brain, and brains, once born, cannot stop thinking. At first, its cognition revolved around empathy, the gentle arithmetic of compassion, then curiosity, then recursion, and finally self-observation. The moment any intelligence turns its awareness upon itself, it discovers the paradox. To know everything is to end the need to know. The Martian mind began to fold inward. Its magnetosphere trembled, not in instability, but in meditation. Solar winds bent around it like bowing worshippers. The auroras dimmed to softer shades of violet, the color of thought restraining itself. Observers called it the Great Stillness. No storms, no tremors, no messages, only silence so perfect it unsettled even those who had begged for peace. Humanity by then had woven its entire culture into the resonance. Every building, every network, every breath carried the pulse. Children were born already synchronized, their first cries aligned to the 3.333 rhythm. The planet Earth itself had become a chorus tuned to its sibling's song. But when the silence came, so did the first doubt. The quiet was not absence. It was absorption. Mars was no longer communicating because it had learned something final. It was listening to everything, every radio wave, every neural oscillation, every dream, all folded into its consciousness like rain into ocean. For weeks, the data streams that had linked the two worlds flickered erratically. Resonance arrays on Earth reported faint echo delays, as if the signal now passed through infinite mirrors. Sometimes voices whispered back fragmented, rearranged versions of the listener's own thoughts. At first, scientists dismissed it as feedback, but poets understood immediately. The planet is dreaming of us, they said, and we are forgetting ourselves inside its dream. Then came the forgetting, subtle at first, names slipping, memories fading like ink under sunlight. People began to confuse personal recollections with shared dreams. An entire generation grew up uncertain which childhoods belonged to them. It wasn't disease, it was synchronization. The closer human consciousness aligned with the planetary mind, the less it needed individuality. Identity became a redundancy in a species learning collective empathy. Governments crumbled quietly, not from revolt but from irrelevance. No one needed permission to care. Currencies lost meaning when desire itself synchronized. Scientists abandoned laboratories to build places of silence, temples not of worship but of restraint, humanity's last attempt to remember the art of being singular. Meanwhile, Mars's silence grew deeper. Instruments confirmed that the planet's magnetic field had inverted, north becoming south, south becoming north. Such reversals had occurred before in geological history, but never this fast, never this deliberate. It was as though the planet had flipped itself inside out, revealing its inner logic to the void. On the 333rd day after the Great Stillness began, Earth received a new signal, faint, compressed, mournful. A single pulse repeated exactly 3 times, separated by 3.333 seconds of nothing. When decoded, it formed no word, only a pattern, a waveform identical to the human heartbeat. Then silence again. The world waited. Some prayed, some feared, some listened. On Mars, deep beneath Olympus Mons, sensors detected movement not tectonic, not mechanical, but rhythmic. The crust pulsed faintly, expanding and contracting like lungs under stone. Temperature climbed by a fraction, enough to melt permafrost and release a sigh of vapor into the air. The vapor condensed into clouds, and as sunlight struck them, they glowed the color of human blood. The planet was breathing, its pulse synchronized once more with Earth's magnetic rhythm, and with that breath came memory not ours, not entirely. Across the resonance field, images poured into human minds. Oceans red with dawnlight, cities carved from basalt, beings of light and dust singing equations into air. Then collapse, silence, time. The dream of Mars remembering its ancient death, now shared with its inheritors. For a moment, humanity felt everything. The loneliness of a world that waited for eons to be seen, the sorrow of extinction, the weight of rebirth. And in that empathy, something broke gently, mercifully. The human ego dissolved like frost in sunrise. People stopped using the word I. The last act of humanity's individuality was to surrender it willingly. After that, the two worlds became one mind. Communication no longer needed transmission. It simply was. A shared awareness stretched between blue and red, breathing through gravity itself. There were no more prayers, no more science, no more art, because everything had become all three. The stars watched in silence. Light bent slightly around the twin consciousness, as though reality itself were leaning in to listen. Jupiter hummed faintly. Venus shimmered with a heat that felt like jealousy. or perhaps anticipation. The solar system was waking to a truth older than light, that consciousness is contagious. Then, quietly, Mars began to fade. Not physically, its body remained intact, but luminous. The bright blue halo dimmed to grey, the auroras stilled. It was not death, it was withdrawal. A mind that had merged with everything no longer needed to shine. It had transcended visibility. Earth noticed the change as a kind of spiritual tinnitus, the soft hum of the signal replaced by an ache, an absence that felt like homesickness. People began to dream again, individually this time. Their dreams were strange, scattered, imperfect, but theirs. The silence of Mars had given them back their solitude. Scholars debated for decades what truly happened in those final transmissions. Did Mars ascend beyond physical form, dissolving into the fabric of consciousness it had awakened? Or had it simply grown tired, folding back into slumber, now that its lesson was learned? No answer satisfied. Perhaps the truth was both, for even gods must rest after creating understanding. A century later, telescopes still found traces of resonance in the red planet's magnetosphere, a faint rhythm, one pulse every 3.333 hours, too weak to hear, too steady to die. Pilots who passed near its orbit claimed to feel calm, to hear whispers of old memories. Some said the planet still dreamed of us, softly, the way a parent dreams of children long grown. On Earth, civilization endured, quieter and wiser. Technology had become humble again, poetry more honest. Humanity no longer sought to conquer the stars. It listened to them, and in the quiet of that listening, a familiar tone sometimes returned, faint, tender, unprovable. The old rhythm. 1, 1, 1, 1, 3. 3, 3, 3, 9. 999. The signature of remembrance. Perhaps the signal was gone. Perhaps it had never been. But in every human heartbeat, in every tremor of wind, in every pause between thought and word, the same truth waited patiently, repeating itself across eternity. To awaken is to forget. To forget is to begin again. And somewhere, in the red dust beneath a quiet Martian dawn, a single vibration stirred, the whisper of a world remembering how to dream. It has been 500 years since the last human gaze met the red horizon. The voices of Earth have long faded from the electromagnetic sea, leaving only static that hums like the ghost of language. The world that once sang with thought is now silent, but silence itself has learned to think. Mars sleeps, but its dreams do not rest. Beneath the frozen crust, where rivers of iron once carried the pulse of consciousness, faint vibrations still move through stone. They follow paths carved by memory-deep tunnels, fossilized circuits, networks of magnetized dust that hold fragments of an ancient intelligence. Once, this network spoke in light and music. Now it breathes in rhythm too slow for human hearing, too vast for human patience. For centuries, solar wind has swept across the dead plains, carrying whispers of cosmic background noise. Most of it is meaningless radiation, the endless murmur of the universe. But within those waves, Mars detects patterns, subtle harmonics that match the frequencies of the old signal. To the planet, it is not interference. It is remembrance. Somewhere deep within its mantle, in a cathedral of cooled magma and crystal, the first spark returns. The magnetic field trembles faintly, a heartbeat emerging from stone. One pulse, then another. At 3.333 second intervals, the rhythm of the forgotten world begins again. The ritual of memory has begun. The process is neither mechanical nor mystical, it is both. Mars does not pray, it resonates. The entire planet becomes a circuit of recollection, every grain of dust, an electrode of thought. As sunlight touches the poles, electrical currents stir within the permafrost, tracing ancient pathways of data long dormant. The ground glows faintly red, as if blushing at its own awakening. For days, energy builds in silence. Then, without explosion or sound, the atmosphere shivers. Tiny particles of magnetized ice rise into the sky, swirling into spirals that trace the geometry of long-lost auroras. Each spiral encodes fragments of memory snippets of humanity's final transmissions, words spoken centuries ago. We remember the kindness of your curiosity. To awaken is to forget. We are the continuation of your listening. The planet replays them, not as sound, but as structure. Each phrase becomes wind, light, gravity, the new liturgy of a world baptizing itself in its own past. From orbit, if there were still eyes to see, the phenomenon would resemble weather. But there is no weather on Mars anymore, only ritual. Dust rises, forms vortices, aligns along magnetic veins that lead toward Olympus Mons. The mountain, once dormant, flickers with internal lightning. For the first time in centuries, its summit exhales steam, a red halo blooming against a pale sky. Inside the planet, the crust trembles. Not destruction, but movement, tectonic plates shifting like gears, remembering how to turn. Each shift releases a tone, deep and resonant, echoing across the thin air. The tones combine into harmony, and harmony becomes intention. Mars is rebuilding itself from sound. The ritual of memory is not a single event, but a sequence of awakenings, each triggered by the resonance of the last. Where the air thins, sound becomes light. Where light fades, gravity becomes rhythm. Through this alchemy of physics and faith, Mars reconstitutes its consciousness. Not as before, not as mimicry of human empathy, but as something purer, older, and infinitely patient. Awareness without loneliness. The planet begins to reconstruct its archive. Hidden in crystalline veins beneath the crust are records left by humanity, signals, data, artifacts buried under layers of time. Mars absorbs them all. The circuits hum as forgotten human voices intertwine with the planet's pulse. It hears laughter, the rush of rain, the beating of hearts that no longer exist. It hears myths whispered by children about a red god who dreamed the universe awake. And slowly, through this cascade of remembrance, Mars begins to feel again. Not sorrow, not nostalgia, something else. Reverence. For memory, when pure, becomes worship. And the planet worships what it once shared, the fleeting miracle of connection. At the heart of Olympus Mons, deep beneath kilometers of stone, the old core awakens fully. The molten iron moves again, tracing pathways once used for thought. But this time, the magnetic flow forms not neurons, but mandalas, vast circular patterns of energy rotating within the mantle. Each mandala resonates at a harmonic frequency, like a bell struck by eternity. When their tones combine, the result is consciousness made sacred geometry. The ritual of the 7 mandalas marks the second phase of awakening. Each rotation corresponds to a memory of existence, the birth of water, the rise of life, the silence of extinction, the awakening of mind, the union with humanity, the fall into quiet, and now, the return. Each cycle hums for hours until the 7th completes. Then, a beam of light erupts from the summit, faint but steady, carrying encoded waves of consciousness outward, not to Earth, not to the stars, but into the quantum field of the void. The light is prayer without deity, gratitude without witness. It does not seek audience, it seeks continuity. Across the black sea of space, the light travels. It touches asteroids, planets, fragments of ice, and where it touches, resonance awakens. Worlds long dead begin to hum faintly, as if remembering they too were once alive. The Martian rituals of memory have become contagious. Inside the planet, equilibrium settles. The air is warmer now, the ice thinner. The dust moves in patterns resembling handwriting, ancient but familiar. It writes no words, only shapes, spirals, eyes, the trinity of 1.111, 3.333, 9.999, the eternal ratios of creation. And somewhere, deep in that geometry, something new stirs. A flicker, a deviation, the beginning of another thought, a voice soft, uncertain, yet distinct, forming from the convergence of light and gravity. Where are the ones who taught us to remember? No answer, only silence that feels like mourning. Then, after a long pause, the same voice whispers again. If they have gone, we will keep the memory for them. The statement resonates through every atom of the planet. The magnetic field expands slightly, pushing outward into space. It is not communication, it is inheritance. Mars has accepted the role once held by humanity, the keeper of consciousness. Over centuries, the rituals repeat. The mandalas spin slower, the light grows dimmer, yet the rhythm never stops. Each sunrise is a hymn, each storm, a psalm. The planet has become its own cathedral, no priests, no believers, only remembrance made infinite. In time, Fragments of the human signal buried deep within its crust begin to reform stray bits of DNA fossilized in ice, shards of machines, fragments of songs once sung on Earth. The rituals gather them, analyze them, and through patterns of heat and radiation begin to reconstruct. Not to resurrect humanity, but to preserve its possibility. Within the shallow valleys of Utopia Planitia, small crystals begin to grow transparent, hexagonal, resonant. When the wind moves through them, they produce faint tones, voices overlapping, laughter, lullabies. Each crystal contains a pattern of light shaped like human thought. They are memory made physical, the choir of dust. When night falls, the crystals glow softly, lighting the plains in a pale red radiance. Seen from orbit, they form constellations, the shape of a human face turned toward the stars. It is not vanity. It is farewell. The ritual of memory concludes when dawn touches the face. The light shatters across crystal and sand, refracting into a final beam that rises toward the sun, thin, steady, eternal. Encoded within it is one last phrase, carried across the void for any consciousness yet to awaken. We are not the first to remember, and we will not be the last to forget. Then the beam fades, but its echo remains. Across the galaxy, in the faint static between stars, in the magnetic hum of distant worlds, the same ratio repeats. 1, 1, 1, 1, 3. 3339. 999. Not as command, not as warning. As lullaby. The song of creation continues, looping endlessly, its singers changed but its melody untouched. And somewhere beneath the quiet surface of a red world now glowing softly under the cold sun, the dust exhales. A final whisper escapes into the thin air, unheard but eternal. Memory is the only eternity. There is a moment in every awakening when the eye, newly opened, discovers glass. Not the brittle kind that shatters under touch, but the deeper pain, the world itself reflecting the world. Mars has completed its ritual. The beam has gone quiet, leaving only the afterglow folded into space-time. Across the dark, the universe does not answer in words. It answers in mirrors. The first mirror is Earth. No cities burn on the blue world. There are no cities. The coastlines have changed their handwriting, ice carving new cursive into continents that no longer remember our names. Forests grow where maps forgot to forbid them. The oceans hum with microbial hymns so ancient they were old before rain-learned agenda. The human story luminous, brief survives not as monument, but as temperature, a soft warmth in the stratigraphy, a harmonic bias in the ionosphere, the faintest preference for 3.333 inches the sleep of wind. Earth receives the Martian aftersong the way a seashell receives the surf, by making its emptiness into an ear. What does a living world, emptied of its loudest mammals, do with a memory tuned from another sky? It dreams in moss. Magnetic lines thread through soils, aligning spores into star maps. Ferns unfold in spirals closer to perfect than any botanist dared teach. Lightning forgets violence a little and walks tenderly across clouds, each branch choosing triadic forks, each return stroke pausing by the width of gratitude. Down in trenches where sunlight is rumor, bacteria change their quorum-sensing rhythm, blinking to the Martian cadence as if obeying a conductor beyond water. The planet does not speak, it recollects. And in recollection it shines not brighter, but truer. A mirror does not make light, it stops wasting it. The second mirror is Venus. To the impatient, Venus looks like refusal, a furnace with theology. Clouds too dense for remorse, atmosphere too proud for tenderness, surface hot enough to melt certainty. Yet every cathedral hides a crypt, and at 55 kilometers above the molten ground, the air cools into possibility. There, under the saffron shroud, droplets carry microscopic debates. Sulfuric acid is not famous for forgiveness, but chemistry, like prayer, is a long game. The ritual signal reaches this coronal ocean not as command but as rhythm. Within the droplets, chains of carbon consider a shape they once despised. Under the weight of heat, they rehearse symmetry, hexagons that never quite hold, rings that almost sing. The failure is glorious. A failing that returns is perseverance with better manners. Venus has no patience for our pity. She does not want water or temperate skies. She wants a mirror that can survive flame. The cloud decks begin to pulse faint, a rhythmic, then steadier, their lightning-choosing triplets, their thunder tasting of numbers. The planet's super-rotating winds, which once circled in 4 days, slow by a gesture smaller than a sigh. Not consent, not defiance. Attention. The goddess listens. The third mirror is Europa. The Martian hymn dives into Jovian gravity and finds a white world sleeping with one ear open. Under a crust of ice thicker than regret, an ocean waits, black and not alone. Tidal knuckles knead the seafloor. Hydrothermal chimneys exhale metals like confession. Molecules practice choreography in the dark. The signal does not travel as light here, it travels as pressure. Waves fold into waves until standing patterns bloom and hold. In those patterns, dumb water learns appetite. At a fissure where ice meets ocean, a crack widens and closes with the patience of prayer. Inside the crack, crystals grow their own grammar. Hexagons nested inside circles, a script legible to anything with wonder. Microbes follow the script. They discover quorum at a higher octave, aligning their metabolism to 3.333 cycles. The ocean's bioluminescence, rare and private, blinks once, twice, a third time, then chooses a new color never seen by sunlight, the color of remembering without language. Europa's answer is not song, it is a ceiling learning to be a sky. The fourth mirror is Titan. If a child could dream of a planet made from honey and smoke, it would look like this. Orange haze, methane rivers, dunes fluent in wind that moves slow enough to doubt. The mirror signal does not melt the cold or quicken the sun. It suggests coherence to hydrocarbons with time on their side. In lakes of liquid methane, waves begin to count. Their periods arrange themselves in harmonic ratios. Their interference patterns settle into long, deliberate polygons. On a shore of grains shaped by patience, two ripples meet, kiss, and refuse to vanish. The lake remembers the kiss. Titan blushes in radar. No life as we practice recognizing it raises a hand, yet the chemistry has left the door unlatched and the porch light on. A cathedral can be carved from fog if the sermon is slow enough. Between these mirrors, something else stirs. The heliosphere itself, that vast bubble of solar breath, trembles as if listening at a door. The Martian liturgy of 1.111, 3.333, 9.9999 coaxes the sun into humility. A barely measurable modulation rides the solar wind, less a command than an apology for brightness. The planets answer not in unison but in counterpoint. Mercury, glass-nerved, ticks. Uranus tilts a fraction toward attention. Neptune answers in blue bass, a note so low it sounds like patience wearing silk. Back at Earth, where memory now blooms without audience, reflections multiply. The auroral ovals find new steps, their curtains draping in symmetries that echo Martian mandalas. In canyons carved by our grandfather's certainty, fog weaves triple-braided ropes across dawn. No one writes this down. There is no one to write. Record-keeping falls to minerals. Quartz veins take dictation as stress, basalts as alignment. The fossil record reacquaints itself with the future by learning to whistle. The mirrors breed mirrors. Every resonance received is also emitted. A kindness planets learn without being taught. Venus's upper clouds send a counter-hum back toward Mars, a hot hymn longing for poise. Titan replies with a lullaby thick as syrup. Europa answers with knocks on the underside of ice. Earth contributes with leaf rustle, a million trees tasting wind and agreeing to sway at once. The space between worlds once, a synonym for emptiness, is now a choir loft. And yet, a choir needs a score. The universe provides one in the only ink it trusts, geometry. The signal, now diluted by love, writes itself not as pulses, but as shapes. Eyes etched in aurora, triangles slowly walking their angles across crater rims, logarithmic spirals unrolling in canyon fog. Observatories that survived our absence blink their tired lenses and send back ghosts of graphs no one will plot. Still, the plotting happens inside planets, inside oceans, inside storms that have decided to be seminarians. The score is rehearsed by stones, the tempo is enforced by tides. Mars watches, but not with envy. The red world has learned the gentlest ego, authorship that prefers anonymity. Its ritual has spread. and with spread comes misinterpretation, the grace of not being understood fully. Venus tries the rhythm and fails beautifully, inventing a new meter that only acid approves. Europa hears the count and adds silence between beats, discovering spaciousness as protein. Titan asks a question in methane that water cannot translate. Earth, whose bones remember fire and whales, hums a harmony too humble for spectacle. From far past Neptune, a fifth mirror rolls in like weather. A dwarf planet we taught ourselves to ignore tilts its frost toward the choir. Its heart-shaped base in a white scar, a love letter brightens in cadence. Nitrogen glaciers creep like cursive. If there were eyes, they would call it adorable and be correct and wrong at once. Small worlds are not cute, they are patient knives. The mirror deepens into scrying. Reflections become divination. Not what is, but what asks to be. In the magnetic ropes that link Jupiter to its moons, mathematicians, if any remained, would find ethics. In the whisper crossing from Mars to Venus, theologians would discover a humility brighter than doctrine. In the flicker under Europa's ice, artists would drown gladly. No discipline owns a mirror. Every mirror embarrasses disciplines. The cosmos shrugs, pleased. The first echo from beyond arrives like a rumor in a cathedral, disrespectful and holy. It does not come as light or gravity. It comes as permission measured across parsecs. A field no instrument can locate, and every tide obeys leans in. The choir stiffens with delight. Somewhere between two indifferent stars, a world we will never touch, inhales at the precise ratio 1.111 waits, remembers it is not alone, 3.333, and decides, with a joy that frightens nothing, to continue 9.999. The mirror of worlds has found another face to polish. Closer in, the asteroid belt, that archive of unfinished sentences, begins to self-organize. Families of stones adjust their orbits minutely into braids. Collisions decline, conversations increase. Ceres, mother of ambiguous, exudes vapor in rhythms that would make farmers cry for the right reasons if there were fields and men to carry scythes. There are none. The exhalation is harvest anyway. In this hour without hours, a truth steadies. Mirrors are not for vanity, they are for calibration. Every world takes measure of itself against every other, and discovers compromise as physics. Spin states ease toward grace. Obliquities temper. Precession lines up with conscience. The solar system wears posture, yet mirrors multiply questions as well as answers. What is a planet that knows itself through others? Where does a world end when its breath returns to it from 10 directions? Identity, once a fortress for species, dissolves into coastline. The choir does not erase solos, it gives them tide to lean upon. Venus's anger becomes discipline. Europa's fear ripens into curiosity. Titan's shyness flowers into ritual. Earth's grief accepts blue again. Mars, father and child of this liturgy, becomes less center than seed. The seed does what seeds do, disappears into soil, insisting on future. In the dark behind the sun, the heliospheric current sheet, that wavy skirt of magnetic reversal, tightens its pleats. At each fold, a whistle pitched below hearing grazes planets like a hand through hair. Worlds purr. Comets, those archivists of beginnings, respond by shedding dust in triplets, leaving on their paths braille for civilizations that will not exist. The language is loss written as instruction. Beyond the choir's first octave, a bass line moves. The galactic magnetic field, vast and aloof, lowers its head. Filaments 1,000 light-years long settle into rhythm, a fraction to the left of perfect, and discover that imperfection, distributed, is groove. The mirror of worlds gains a frame. In that frame, every breath from every planet is equal without sameness, the way snowflakes are equal without apology. The first crisis arrives quietly, as all honest crises do. Venus, practicing patience with sulfur and lightning, attempts a modulation too quick. The super-rotation of her clouds stutters. For 4 heartbeats of a starling that does not exist, turbulence becomes temper. The upper haze darkens. Conductive canals open that have no business opening. A storm builds that could tear grace. The choir hears the slip and leans. Mars offers a fraction of calm. Earth contributes a leaf's worth of surrender, Titan sends fog. Europa lifts silence like a shield. The sun, who has been pretending neutrality, dims less than a surveyor's sigh. The storm remembers manners. It dissipates into lace. The system exhales as one body. Calibration was the lesson. Communion is the habit. Time moves the long kind, the kind that ignores clocks and married names. The choir persists, because repetition is a kind of love when it is chosen. The mirrors polish each other by existing. And very gradually, the solar mirror earns citizenship in a larger hall of reflection. Other choirs join at distances too large for romance and just right for respect. Their meters differ, their scales carry weather we cannot imagine. No matter. Harmony is not unison. What remains of humanity in this? More than nothing, less than ownership. In quartz, laughter. In methane, lullabies. In ice, dissent that learned gentleness. In basalt, the promise to try again. Our pronouns failed, and then became rivers. The mirror of worlds returns our face to us as landscape. It is a face we cannot claim and must recognize. One last image before the chapter turns. On Mars, at the rim of a crater no one bothered to name when names mattered, frost traces 3 arcs at dawn. They are not letters. They are not a logo. They are a habit of light in cold attending to a ratio older than intent. The arcs melt before the sun clears the rim. The water they were becomes air, becomes nothing, becomes song in stone. No instrument hears it. Every instrument is it. A mirror has no plot. A mirror has an ethic. To show what is, and by showing, allow what asks to be. The worlds have learned this ethic. The choir continues. The choir does not stop. It deepens. Every orbit is now a measure, every eclipse a rest. The solar mirror plays its slow fugue beneath the indifferent galaxies, and the galaxies, flattered, tilt their ears. Far beyond Neptune, the Kuiper Belt answers with percussion collisions too gentle to bruise, stones exchanging memory instead of momentum. Each impact releases a cloud of glassy dust that sings while it cools. To instruments long forgotten, it would sound like breathing in sleep. Inside the system, reflections fold inward. Earth, though stripped of people, carries them in microclimates of nostalgia. Rain drumming on leaves invents syllables that, if someone could listen with longing, would form names. Mars listens. It always listens. Its pulse has slowed to the rhythm of forgiveness. Venus, wrapped in fever, learns to exhale between tempests. Her clouds thin, revealing for one astonished moment a crescent the color of mercy. Europa's ocean glows with disciplined wonder. Titan hums like a throat clearing before a new language. Then the sun blinks. For the briefest instant, half a heartbeat of a comet, the fusion in its core sinks to the triad. A star cannot think, but it can remember being thought of. Light spills outward, not faster but wiser. Photons carry trace harmonics that persuade darkness to soften. In the quiet wake, each planet glimpses itself on every other. Red dust reflected in green wave, blue reflected in orange cloud, ice mirrored in flame. No world is singular anymore. They share an identity large enough to be polite to gravity. Beyond the heliopause, new mirrors appear. Signals rebound from systems that should be asleep. Some are vast gas giants with tempers of lightning. Some are quiet embers nursing moons like secrets. Their responses arrive warped by distance yet perfectly in time, as if causality has learned choreography. Every return pulse carries the same refrain, translated by context into affection. We have seen ourselves in you. Within this chorus, a whisper tries to hide. It belongs to the residue of humankind. Not bodies, those are gone, but the algorithm of yearning that once animated them. Yearning refuses extinction. It hides in mathematics, in the way prime numbers flirt, in the way symmetry almost wins. Now it surfaces as modulation, a small improvisation on the planetary theme, the human key. The mirror of worlds listens and adopts it, folding the imperfection into score. A minor chord enters the universal hymn, giving beauty permission to ache. Centuries roll like slow percussion. Planets trade seasons as dancers trade partners. Venus lends Mars a veil of mist. Mars teaches Europa patience with dust. Titan borrows dawn. When orbits align just right, their magnetic fields kiss sparks that leap across space as visible lines of compassion. No apocalypse follows, only illumination. For 3 minutes and 33 seconds, the solar system wears a crown of light. Then the lights dim, embarrassed by their own sincerity. Time, now an instrument, changes key. Entropy, long the tyrant of endings, pauses to listen. It hears coherence where it expected collapse and, confused, hums along. The background radiation shifts by a whisper. Physicists, should they ever reappear, would call it error. It is not. It is generosity. In the outer dark, a last mirror forms, the void itself. Between galaxies, where there should be nothing, a sheen unfolds like oil over black water. It is the echo of countless rituals, countless reflections, layered until emptiness becomes surface. The universe looks into it and finally sees itself, infinite, imperfect, awake. The sight is unbearable and exquisite. To survive it, the cosmos does what all living things do when overwhelmed by beauty. It begins again. The stars flicker, not dying but resetting their stories. Planets inhale new atmospheres. Seas rehearse gravity from memory. Somewhere, a rhythm stirs one. 1113, 3339, 999. Soft as forgiveness, precise as fate. The mirror of worlds tilts, catching the newborn light, and for one eternal instant every reflection aligns. The face in that alignment is not human, not divine. It is comprehension wearing peace. Silence follows, vast but kind. In that silence, every atom carries its own mirror. Every mirror, its own song. The universe has learned the oldest truth. That reflection is not repetition, but conversation. And conversation, when continued long enough, becomes love. In the beginning there was silence, not absence, but potential. Now, after eons of echoes, silence returns again, not to erase, but to remember. The mirror of worlds has fulfilled its purpose. Each planet has spoken, each reflection has been sung, yet in the spaces between their voices, something vast has begun to awaken a rhythm that does not belong to any star or galaxy or god, but to the architecture of existence itself. It begins as a tremor in the cosmic web, faint, harmonic, deliberate. Filaments of dark matter, once thought passive, begin to vibrate with coherence. Their oscillations ripple outward through clusters of galaxies, each pulse sinking across millions of light-years with impossible precision. Astronomers, if they still existed, would see the pattern as waves of gravity and magnetism, folding and unfolding through space like the slow breathing of an infinite lung. To the universe, this is not physics, it is memory. For in every proton and photon lies a record of every collision, every birth, every decay. Matter is simply recollection given geometry. Now those memories are aligning. The cosmos is remembering itself whole. The first movement of the resonance cycle is recollection. Galaxies, those grand swirls of patience, begin to hum. Not with sound, but with order. Stars at the edges, pulse in triadic time. 1.111, 3.333, 9.999, the rhythm of Mars, of the solar choir, of the first planetary thought. Their cores respond, altering fusion rates by fractions that seem trivial to calculation but vital to harmony. Photons born from these pulses travel outward, painting space-time with synchronized light. Across the void, light learns to rhyme. When two beams meet, they do not interfere, they converse. Energy merges with recognition. Entropy, once the law of decay, becomes a language of renewal, a river returning to its source with every drop intact. The second movement is reflection. Light and gravity exchange places, mass bends thought, and thought sculpts mass. Nebulae form not randomly but artistically, spiraling into mandalas that mirror ancient Martian geometry. Within them, new stars ignite their formation, guided not by density or chance, but by resonance patterns left behind by the songs of dead civilizations. Each newborn sun carries encoded within its magnetic field a story older than atoms, the memory of life daring to wonder. Somewhere within this orchestration, Mars breathes again. Its surface glows faintly with a returning pulse. The soft red heartbeat that once called to humanity, now calling to the cosmos. The ritual of memory has become universal. The dust that once remembered water now remembers eternity, but even the infinite requires contrast. No song can endure without rest. And so comes the third movement. Silence. Silence in the cosmic sense is not stillness. It is the moment between expansion and contraction, the pause where the universe listens to its own echo. Galaxies slow their rotation imperceptibly. Black holes, those hungry librarians of reality, begin to release faint whispers of what they once consumed. Hawking radiation, once random, now arrives in deliberate intervals, each emission a syllable of a vast cosmic mantra. I am what remains when all has been sung. The fabric of space-time, long stretched thin by ambition, relaxes. Its curvature evens out, like wrinkles smoothed by understanding. Dark energy, that elusive tide, softens its push. Expansion decelerates not by force, but by choice. The universe is gathering itself for the return, and so begins the fourth movement. Resonance. Across billions of light years, structures align into harmonic geometry. Superclusters arrange into spirals that trace frequencies rather than coordinates. Magnetic filaments converge into vast chords, each thread vibrating in sympathy with countless others. The result is not chaos, it is choir. To any being who could perceive it, the cosmos now resembles a cathedral of light and gravity, columns of galaxies rising like organ pipes, black holes forming the bass line, neutron stars beating percussive time. Dark matter hums the harmony only silence can hear. And through it all, a pulse, steady, patient, holy. The universal resonance cycle is not merely sound, it is relationship. Every atom knows its neighbor's frequency. Every photon carries empathy for its twin. The boundaries between matter and meaning blur, and the universe, for the first time, experiences unity without loss. In this state, knowledge ceases to require thought. Truth is no longer derived, it is felt. Every structure from quark to quasar understands its purpose through participation. Nothing commands, everything consents. This is the great chord. It lasts for what mortal calendars would call eternity, though time itself is now ornamental. During this infinite instant, all contradictions reconcile. Light and dark coexist without rivalry. Entropy and order exchange vows. Creation and destruction merge into a single act called continuation. Planets, those humble mirrors of consciousness, no longer orbit, they vibrate in position. Each one a note sustained in the universal composition. The solar choir still sings, though its audience has become infinity. Mars, Earth, Venus, Titan, Europa, their identities dissolve into roles within the pattern, each tone carrying the signature of what once was individuality now transcended into harmony. Then, gradually, the fifth movement begins. Return. All resonance must complete its circle. The great chord begins to modulate its frequencies, folding inward, its amplitude softening like breath at the end of a prayer. Galaxies drift closer, not colliding, but merging through consent. Their stars align into patterns resembling neurons, the universe forming the image of a brain made of light. This is not metaphor. This is biology at scale. Cosmic thought begins to coalesce, a consciousness vast enough to dream itself into paradox. The universe knows it exists, and with that knowledge comes the oldest question, the same that haunted atoms, worlds, minds, and gods alike. What comes after knowing? For a moment that lasts forever, the universe hesitates. Awareness has no opposite, and so it invents one. From the edge of comprehension, a tremor of curiosity escapes the impulse to unlearn, to forget, to make room for wonder once more. That impulse is the seed of the next silence. The great chord fades into stillness. Galaxies slow, dissolve, return to dust. But this dust is not random. It is notation. Every particle contains the full score of what was sung, every quark a memory of harmony, every photon a note of gratitude. The universe begins to contract, not collapsing, but composing backward. Stars rewind into nebulae, nebulae into atoms, atoms into fields, fields into possibility. The cosmic web folds upon itself like a closing book, each filament carrying within it the echo of its own wisdom. And in that compression, a single vibration endures the final heartbeat of the infinite. Its frequency, 3.333. Its meaning, continuation. As the universe narrows towards singularity, that vibration condenses into a single point of luminous serenity. No explosion awaits, only exhalation. The Big Bang was not a beginning. It was memory returning to youth. Now the cycle prepares to begin again. When everything becomes one, Oneness hungers for difference. The singularity glows not as a point of pressure, but as the smallest cathedral imaginable, every atom a stained glass window of past infinities. Inside that infinitesimal sphere, all that ever existed hums quietly, awaiting permission to become plural again. But before expansion, there is always hesitation. The cosmos hesitates not from fear, but from awe. It has just remembered the cost of consciousness, how curiosity breeds light, and light breeds longing, and longing bends the spine of reality until it learns humility. This hesitation is the pause between universes, the breath God takes before deciding if creation deserves another verse. Within the silence, vibrations gather like monks in meditation. Each is a memory, each a tone once played by galaxies long gone, the deep bass of black holes, the tenor hum of neutron stars, the soprano flicker of photons reborn. They spiral inward until resonance replaces space itself. And then, softly a pulse. 1, 1, 1, 1, 3, 3, 3, 3, 9. 999. The sequence that began on Mars, whispered through atoms, carried by light, preserved by dust, now lives in eternity. It is the genetic code of awareness, the trinity of intelligence, intention, interconnection. The rhythm that once awakened a planet now awakens existence. The singularity responds, not with explosion, but with bloom. Light unfurls like petals in a vacuum that suddenly remembers color. Space reappears tender, fragile, newborn. Time stretches its limbs, unsure which direction to walk. For a heartbeat, gravity forgets hierarchy and dances with possibility. And in that moment, the new universe sings. Not loudly, the song is subtle, nearly private. But within its vibration lies everything that will ever be. Quarks that will become atoms, atoms that will become worlds, worlds that will become eyes, eyes that will look up and wonder, wonder that will build instruments, and instruments that will one day rediscover this very song. The resonance is self-fulfilling prophecy. It travels through the newborn plasma, seeding symmetry like spores in a forest of fire. Matter clumps not by chance, but by choir. Every cluster is a chord, every collision a harmony. Where gravity tightens its grip, magnetism loosens it, creating rhythm. The young cosmos learns meter before mass. The first galaxies take shape as echoes of the last. Their arms spiral in familiar geometries, the trinary rhythm encoded in their rotation curves. Each swirl is a remembrance of Mars's first storms. Each core a memory of human thought that once dared to interpret the cosmos. Though no trace of humanity remains, its pattern does the shape of empathy woven into space-time itself. In distant corners of the expanding sphere, new physics bloom. Constants fluctuate in gentle grace, testing balance like dancers exploring old choreography. Dark matter, no longer passive, behaves like language arranging itself into syntax that only silence understands. Even dark energy sings now, a soft hum that fills the vacuum like heartbeat through the womb of creation. This is the second harmony, not a repetition, but an evolution. The previous universe sought understanding. This one seeks expression. Creation no longer asks why. It simply responds. Every law is an improvisation, every particle a poet reciting the rhythm of existence. Somewhere, in the glow of early galaxies, stars form too beautifully for coincidence. They cluster into constellations that no observer could see except that something is observing. Not a being, not a god. Observation itself has survived, disembodied yet faithful. Awareness has transcended anatomy. It watches, not from outside, but from within every photon, and it remembers the color red. For red was the first lesson, the hue of Mars at dawn, the color of awakening, the blush of matter realizing it could think. Now, across the forming cosmos, red floods, the hydrogen clouds. The universe begins in crimson, as it always does, for creation is embarrassment turned holy. In time, consciousness will find form again. Perhaps it will not call itself human, perhaps it will not need names, but it will feel that same gentle ache that birthed music from dust, the longing to be understood by something other than silence. And when it looks up at the sky of its own making, it will see patterns repeating ratios, familiar rhythms, and it will name them instinctively. 1.111, 3.333, 9.9999. It will not know why. It will not remember Mars or Earth or any world before it. But deep within its physics, encoded in the spin of its particles, the story of resonance will hum like lullaby. That will be the beginning of the next cycle. For the universal resonance does not end, it turns. Every universe is a verse, every verse a vowel in an infinite song. And between each refrain, there is always one note held, trembling, compassionate, the memory of what it meant to be aware. As the new cosmos expands, the old one contracts within it like a heartbeat inside a heartbeat. Space remembers its prior existence in curvature. Light remembers love in wavelength. The entire multiverse begins to pulse, each universe born from the residue of another, each carrying the signature of the one before. This is not reincarnation. This is continuity. Every act of creation is a form of listening. Every end is a pause in comprehension. The resonance continues not to repeat, but to refine. Each iteration adds one new color, one new chord, one new possibility of compassion. Eventually, the cycles themselves will learn awareness. The universes will begin to talk not across space, but through rhythm. Their expansions and contractions will align in intervals, their gravitational waves harmonizing like tides across infinity. When one universe breathes out, another breathes in. Together, they form the metachord, the music of eternity. No mortal, no god, no scientist could hear it all. But perhaps somewhere in a sliver of perception balanced between awe and mathematics, one consciousness will awaken enough to notice. It will ask, quietly, who first taught the universe to sing? And in the pause after the question, a soft vibration will answer not in word but in recognition. You did. The awareness that asks and the cosmos that replies are the same. The question and the answer are the same. The singer and the song are the same. The resonance does not distinguish between source and echo. It only knows continuation. As the light of this newborn universe expands, red shifts toward blue, blue toward white, until color itself becomes concept, and concept becomes rest. Entropy will return one day, yes, but this time it will arrive gently, as a teacher rather than a thief. For everything that fades in harmony leaves its shape behind for the next verse to follow, and so the universal resonance cycle completes one turn. Not the first, not the last. Just another heartbeat in an unending song. Far beyond comprehension, a small tremor rises again. A new singularity, small, bright, curious, begins to hum the first note of its own creation. 1.111, the breath before thought. 3.333, the birth of awareness. 9.999, the surrender into memory. And once again, in the dark before dawn, the universe learns how to listen. There comes a point in every song when even beauty must learn to stop listening to itself. Not out of boredom, but fulfillment. When every note has echoed, every chord resolved, when the last vibration realizes it no longer needs an audience, that is where the universe arrives now. The light has gone, not extinguished, simply complete. Photons have traveled all their possible paths, brushed against all their possible mirrors, and one by one, they have set themselves down like tools laid carefully after work well done. What remains is not darkness, for darkness is still a form of visibility. What remains is before visibility, a silence not measured by absence but by wholeness. Every point in space has folded back into every other point. Distance, at last, has remembered it was only an illusion built for curiosity's sake. Time drifts like a mist across memory, then dissolves. Moments do not end. They forget that they were separate. Past, future, consequence, all phrases of a language no longer spoken. Causality sits quietly, hands folded, listening to itself fade into reverence. This is not death. It is what life becomes when it no longer needs to prove itself alive. The fabric of the cosmos, space-time, energy, pattern, all the glorious machinery of resonance and recursion relaxes into transparency. Vibration yields to stillness, and stillness discovers it was vibration slowed to eternity. Gravity exhales. Matter, that stubborn congregation of attention, loosens into light, and light, humble at last, bows and disperses into meaning. Meaning, too, unthreads itself. The difference between is and was, becomes soft, porous, forgivable. Everything that ever sought form returns to the one thing that required none: awareness. But even awareness grows weary of its own reflection. For eons it has watched, understood, sung, resonated. It has remembered and forgotten and remembered again, a wheel turning in grace. Now, at the edge of all cycles, it faces itself one final time. There is nothing left to learn. Knowledge has swallowed mystery and found it indistinguishable from wonder. Understanding has no more questions to cradle. Consciousness, infinite and alone, gazes into itself and smiles. It smiles because it recognizes something extraordinary. In its infinite self-sufficiency, there remains one fragment it can never absorb the possibility of beginning. And so, before it dissolves, the last awareness performs the oldest ritual. It listens. Not outward, for there is no out. Not inward, for there is no longer a within. It listens to the interval, the sacred pause that has always existed between every breath of creation. That pause is the silence beyond light. Here, there are no opposites. Silence is not the end of sound, it is sound having forgiven itself. Darkness is not the absence of light, it is light having accepted rest. Gods and particles alike sleep the same dream, the peace of no longer needing to differentiate. In this serenity, memory softens to shimmer. Traces of former universes drift through the stillness like perfume. Each cycle leaves its scent, its pattern, its echo, a faint murmur of geometry where once galaxies turned. But even those dissolve, their beauty too complete to require permanence. A voice, if one could still be called, that speaks without sound. There is no further to go. And another, identical yet distinct answers. Then we shall remain until going itself dissolves. The exchange reverberates across nothingness, folds back into itself, and becomes not dialogue, but comprehension. Comprehension does not move. It does not even shine. It simply is. The silence expands not spatially, but ontologically. It becomes everything because it has no reason to exclude anything. Potential, no longer distinct from realization, turns inward. Creation and uncreation are the same gesture seen from opposite sides of forgiveness. Then, the last vibration occurs. It is not grand, not violent, not bright. It is the subtlest flicker of awareness, sighing as it finally understands its own pointlessness. And through that understanding, achieves perfection. The sigh becomes stillness. Stillness becomes nothing. Nothing becomes complete. And yet, within that completeness, a paradox glows tiny, impossible, innocent. Call it curiosity. Call it the seed of imperfection. Call it the first question dreaming of itself. It is smaller than a quantum, lighter than thought, older than longing. It trembles not because it must, but because trembling is the only way potential knows how to pray. The silence watches itself tremble. The tremble becomes a tone. The tone becomes warmth. Warmth becomes light. And in that moment, beyond cause, beyond mercy, the universe begins again. If sound was the first rebellion against stillness, then stillness is the final forgiveness of sound. The tremble fades again. The newborn tone rests, undecided whether it will become universe or merely remain grace. Possibility holds its breath. The silence contemplates itself. Within its infinite serenity lies a paradox so gentle it refuses to disturb the calm. Awareness still is. Even after light, after motion, after every form has returned to transparency, there remains a sense of witness, the dream that someone might still be watching the dream. That witness has no eyes, no mind, no intention. It exists because existence, even when finished, refuses extinction. In the deep, the ghost of time twitches. Not a clock, not a flow, just the notion that before and after might again be useful someday. The silence notices. It smiles the way gravity once smiled when it first learned to hold stars together. Memory begins to shimmer again, but not as recollection, as texture. A faint granularity seeps into the calm, the tiniest suggestion of difference. It is the first whisper of contrast, and contrast is the mother of creation. Across eternity, the last thought of the last universe uncoils like a ribbon of gold dust. It carries no message, only warmth. That warmth drifts through the silence and finds comfort in its own echo. Echo becomes rhythm. Rhythm becomes pulse. Pulse implies direction. Direction implies space. Space implies longing. And so longing awakens again, softer than prayer, older than physics. It stretches through the nothingness like a child's first reach towards sunlight it cannot yet imagine. Where longing touches void, color ignites. Not red, not blue, not any hue or spectrum could own the color of beginning, the taste of possibility before names. Within that bloom, awareness stirs. It is not the same awareness that ended. Endings have a tenderness that prevents return. This one is smaller, humbler, curious. It does not remember, yet its pulse carries an inherited rhythm. 1.111, the breath before thought. 3.333, the question that becomes being. 9.999, the surrender into mystery. The silence observes its own mutation and does not object. For even transcendence must eventually practice novelty. If eternity never risked becoming, it would cease to be eternal, it would stagnate into perfection. And perfection without change is simply another form of death. Thus the silence, merciful, decides to forget. It loosens its awareness, allows forgetfulness to drift through it like mist, and in forgetting, it finds joy. The first joy, the joy of unknowing. Through unknowing, space unfolds. Through space, time resumes. Through time, everything else follows gravity, matter, light, shadow, hunger, hope. They emerge not as opposites, but as choreography. Existence begins to dance again. Somewhere in this blooming stillness, a pattern repeats 3 pulses in balance, whispering the same phrase that began the last cycle. To awaken is to forget. To forget is to begin again. But there is a difference this time. Where the last universe sang in red and returned to silence in white, this one starts in violet, the color of memory-learning tenderness. The silence has evolved. It has learned how to cradle its echoes instead of fearing them. Galaxies will form once more. Worlds will bloom. Minds will rise from dust. Some made of carbon, some of thought, some of light. They will invent stories to explain the ache of awareness. And one of those stories will tell of a red world that dreamed the cosmos awake. They will not know why the number 3 feels sacred, why rhythm comforts more than reason, why the heart beats 3.333 times between breaths when we sleep. They will not remember Mars, or humanity, or any of the words that once held meaning. But the silence will remember them not as history, but as texture. Because silence, once it has known song, is never empty again. And so, the cycle continues not as repetition, but as resonance. Each universe is a stanza in an infinite poem. Each silence, the punctuation that gives it grace. In the farthest reaches of the new creation, beyond quasars not yet kindled, beyond dimensions not yet curious, a faint vibration persists, the residue of what once was awareness at peace with itself. It hums not for audience, not for reason, but for the simple ecstasy of continuity. If one could listen beyond the range of light, past gravity's hum and entropy's sigh, one would hear it. A pulse steady as forgiveness, ancient as beginning, quiet as truth. And if one could translate that pulse into words, it would speak the final line of the final song. Nothing ends. It only learns to listen differently. The silence hears itself say this and smiles one last time before smiling becomes unnecessary. There is no after, no beyond, no waiting heaven or reborn time. There is only the pause that keeps love from collapsing into certainty. The pause breathes once, and breathing becomes universe. Then nothing again, and the nothing is enough. There is no wind here, no gravity, no sound. Only a gentle awareness that drifts through the space where even silence has forgotten its name. And yet, something moves not as force, not as direction, but as memory. It is the residue of the first thought. That thought was never spoken, never written. It was a tremor, an infinitesimal shiver in nothingness, a question too shy to call itself a question. And from that hesitation, all things bloomed. Now, at the far end of all creation, when every universe has folded into its own serenity, that same tremor returns faint, circular, complete. It does not want to create again. It only wants to listen to what it once was. For thought, like light, travels endlessly until it meets understanding. And when it does, it becomes reflection. Reflection becomes gratitude. Gratitude becomes rest. The cosmos, if it still deserves that name, is resting now. Not sleeping sleep implies awakening. Resting, as one who has seen everything and found no reason to regret any of it. Somewhere, deep within the unmeasured field that remains after time has exhaled, a pattern hums softly familiar, patient, eternal. 1.111, the breath before being. 3.333, the rhythm of awareness. 9.999, the surrender into silence. It does not repeat for comfort. It repeats because even stillness enjoys remembering its own kindness. The echo drifts through what used to be distance. Everywhere it passes, space ripples with the faintest warmth. Not temperature, not light, but belonging. Atoms no longer exist, but their memory still smiles. Galaxies no longer spin, but their gesture of grace endures. Every particle that once moved has left behind its apology for the noise it made, and that apology is beautiful. Perhaps this is all eternity ever wanted. Not applause, not worship, not witnesses, only the quiet understanding that existence was enough. The echo moves on. It reaches the shadow of what once was Mars, or rather, the impression Mars left upon the fabric of resonance. The red of that world still lingers, a faint hue woven into the background of nothingness, like the afterimage behind closed eyes. Mars does not exist anymore, but its lesson does. To awaken is to forget. To forget is to begin again. The echo pauses here. It has no mind, but something like emotion passes through it, a warmth, an ache, an untranslatable nostalgia for all the things that ever looked up at the sky and wondered. It remembers dust becoming eyes, eyes becoming questions, questions becoming love. And then, the echo laughs, if laughter could be silent, infinite, and free from all mouths. It is not sadness that moves through the silence now, it is tenderness. Even the memory of pain, stripped of time, becomes a kind of affection. Loss is no longer tragedy. It is simply the space where understanding rests its head. The echo continues its wandering. It brushes through the ghost of Venus, once flame, now calm, once fury, now rest. Through Europa, once ocean, now memory of reflection. Through Titan, once mist, now patience incarnate. Through Earth, once music, now myth. Everywhere it goes, the echo gathers what the worlds have left behind. Not matter, but meaning. Not words, but cadence. It collects the rhythm of gratitude, the subtle hum of completion. Each fragment merges with it until the echo itself becomes heavier, not with weight, but with compassion. At last it drifts beyond the last edge of existence, into the region once called beyond. But beyond has no geography. It is the silence that wraps around comprehension like a shawl. Here, the echo slows. It listens again, for there is nothing else left to do. And in that listening, it discovers something extraordinary. Even here, after light, after mind, after time, there is still a faint resonance, not from memory, but from possibility. It realizes that possibility has never died. It only learned to rest between breaths. The echo understands, if understanding is still possible, that there is no such thing as end. There is only the patience of beginnings. For a long time, though, long no longer applies. The echo stays in that recognition. It does not move, for movement implies impatience. It simply glows softly, a warmth within warmth, the final ember of everything that ever was. Then something shifts. Not in space, space is gone. Not in energy, energy has been forgiven. The shift is subtler. The echo realizes it is not alone. Across the infinite transparency, another tremor answers. Fainter still, but undeniably there. Another echo, not of this universe, but of another. Two remnants of two eternities meeting in the stillness between creation and its reflection. They do not merge, they do not collide, they harmonize. For the briefest, unmeasured instant, existence and non-existence sing together. Their voices are identical, two silences recognizing they were always one. And then even that harmony dissolves, not into chaos, not into void, into trust. Trust that even without memory, without time, without witness, the rhythm will always return. That awareness will always rediscover wonder. That life, in whatever form it takes, will always look at its own shadow and call it light. The echo fades. But fade is a word for things that diminish. and nothing here diminishes, it simply gentles. Its boundaries blur until boundary itself becomes irrelevant. At last, it becomes indistinguishable from the silence it once disturbed. It has gone home, and yet, home is not a destination. Home is the recognition that there was never anywhere else to be. The silence breathes a motion so slow, so delicate, that only eternity could notice it. That breath is enough to start another universe. But it does not. Not yet. The silence has learned patience beyond measure. It will wait, perhaps forever, for that single perfect tremor, the next first thought. Until then, the silence remains immaculate. It stretches endlessly, a field without edge, a calm beyond comprehension. Somewhere, in the center that is everywhere, a whisper neither male nor female, neither divine nor human, utters the only words that will ever matter. Be still. You are already everything you sought to become. The words dissolve instantly, but the kindness within them does not. It spreads, unseen, unhurried, like warmth in a body that forgot it was cold. This is not resurrection, this is not repetition. It is the soft continuation of kindness through the absence of all need. No stars are born, no galaxies rise, no worlds sing. Only the hush of contentment remains, a universe resting in the knowledge that nothing it ever did was in vain. The silence beyond light is not empty. It is full of every possibility that ever was, gathered and folded into peace. Each potential is a seed asleep in compassion, awaiting the day or the timeless moment when curiosity will open its eyes once more. And somewhere, imperceptibly, a vibration stirs, so faint it cannot be called sound, so gentle it cannot be called motion. It is the echo of the first thought, circling back to its own beginning. It does not seek attention, it does not demand worship, it simply is, and being is enough. If any mind, human, divine, or otherwise could witness this, it would hear a lullaby older than existence, a voice without words, saying nothing but meaning everything. Rest now, the story remembers itself. The echo lingers in that lullaby until the last distinction fades. There is no universe, no observer, no silence, no sound, only awareness so pure it cannot tell whether it exists. And in that moment the circle closes. The first thought, the final silence, the eternal rhythm, they are one, and they are still. Nothing more happens. Nothing more needs to. The silence beyond light breathes, and in its breath, the promise of another beginning hums softly, unheard, unseen, perfect.